Hello, my name is Roisin and today I'm going to talk to you about 10 books that you probably haven't seen on YouTube, unless you watch a lot of my channel. The first one on my list is The Betrayed by Riene Arcache Melvin. This is a proof copy, so I will put the actual cover here so that you can look out for it. This tells the story of two sisters who are from the Philippines but grew up in San Francisco because their father was the leader of a trade union that was outlawed during the Marcos regime. Once he's assassinated and the Marcos regime falls, they return to a Philippines in turmoil. One of the sisters' husbands is running for office, but in the year that he is, there have been 5 attempted coups, so all is not stable. The other sister is in love with this husband, and together they go and travel across the Philippines as part of his campaign. The sister who is married to him remains at home and is pregnant with his child, and also sees ghosts. And so it is a story about the sisters' past and their relationships with one another, and also about the past and the relationships of the Philippines. There is a lot about politics here, the haunting nature of the violence that has happened under the Marcos regime and continues as the story progresses. It is a really great atmospheric novel, very sticky and clinging and dark, and I think it does such a great job of bringing to life a period of time and also in creating complex, unlikable, interesting characters that are very compelling to follow despite the fact that they make terrible choices. That idea of history repeating itself, of the ghosts of the past haunting us, of the sins of the father coming to bear on the lives of the children, all of these things repeat throughout this novel as it slowly unfolds and of this family and this country start to unravel. It is wonderful, gripping, and I really think it deserves way more readers. Next is Keeping the House by Tice Cin. This is a story set in North London in the 90s and 2000s about a woman whose husband has gone to prison because he is a drug smuggler, but he still has a load of heroin in Turkey that he needs to smuggle into the UK, and so she takes over this business. It is also about her daughters when she is very young in the 90s and also as a teenager in the 2000s, but mostly it is about a Turkish and Turkish Cypriot community in North London during this time. What I really loved about this book is that it really brings to life a London that I recognise as someone who grew up in London as well. It is not the sort of glossy Bridget Jones London. It is a London of corner shops and of the parks and playgrounds in between council houses. It is a London of back alleys and families all in one room of a council house. It is really wonderfully evocative and quite strange in terms of the way that it jumps around, in terms of the way that it uses language, bringing elements of Turkish into the writing and giving us translations for that squeezed in between the lines, the way that it uses multicultural London English as the voice of the novel. It is quite dark, dealing as it does with drug trade, drug addiction, violence and lawlessness within this community, sexual violence and misogyny as well, but it has also a lot of humour. It is a really dark, sharply funny book, which I really enjoyed about it. I thought it was so compelling. I don't know necessarily if it would be everyone's cup of tea, but if you like something dark and sharp and funny with lots of strange moments, vignettes of characters scattered throughout, then I think you would really enjoy this one. It's quite hard to keep your mind on the timeline, so you have to just kind of go with it, but I definitely think it is worth reading for that. Historical fiction, I think, is fairly underrepresented on Booktube in general. There aren't a lot of people who talk about it, and one of my favourite series is the Lyman Chronicles series, the first of which is called Game of Kings. And no, it is not a rip-off of Game of Thrones. It was written in, I think, 1968, so it definitely came first. It tells the story of a Crawford of Lymond who is a young man who has been exiled from Scotland and forced to work as a galley rower in the French Navy because he betrayed Scotland, as far as we can tell, and he has returned with a band of miscreants and criminals to seemingly abuse the lords who threw him out. All this time it's set in the 16th century during the very early reign of Mary Queen of Scots, who became queen at 6 days old, and the constant on and off war between England and Scotland that is going on as the background. It has a huge cast of characters and a lot of really great historical detail. It really feels like like you are in the moment, but at the same time it is a very much action adventure oriented plot with a swashbuckling kind of suave Jack Sparrow-esque hero who will speak French and quote poetry and always seems to end up getting the better of everyone, even when he seems to be in a great scrape. It has so much heart and so many brilliant characters, brilliant female characters, really well rounded, and I think so much fun. Like if you like a sort of fantasy, I think if you are a fantasy reader looking to branch out into historical fiction, I feel like because the world building in this is great in terms of the way that it builds 16th century Scotland, and then the rest of the series goes off around the European world of the Renaissance period, and I just think it is so brilliant, funny, engaging, and really, really wonderful to read. Next one by a writer who is definitely talked about on Booktube, but for a book that I haven't heard many people mention, and that is the Poisonwood Bible by Barbara Kingsolver. Probably just because it came out in 1998, so it's not old enough to be a classic, but it's not new enough to be like up to date to talk about, but it is one of my favourite books by Barbara Kingsolver. This one is set in the 50s, 60s, and maybe even the 70s in Congo, about a man who is a missionary and has come to bring his brand of evangelical Protestantism to this part of Congo, bringing with him his wife and his 4 daughters, and the chapters are told from varying perspectives of the daughters and I believe also the mother, and it is their experience of moving to Congo and experiencing a world entirely outside of their own, their misguided and violent ways that they interact with the indigenous people and with the landscape itself, the ways that the land of Congo seems to be trying to remove them almost like a virus. And it moves across this very important, significant moment in Congolese history, the rise of Patrice Lumumba and the independence movement in Congo, and the ways that this family gets entangled with that period of history. It is a brilliant, sharp look at the violence of the missionary movement in general and the arrogance and thoughtlessness of imperialism, and I think it is just so atmospheric, really evocative, which I'm saying about all of these books, but it is really makes you feel like you are in the time period, and it is strange and wonderful to read. I really enjoyed it. I think that Kingsolver is great again at building a world and also building an epic long book. Both of the books that I have read from her have been super long, and I am planning to read another one. I'm hoping to read The Lacuna this year, so if any of my mutuals want to join me for the big book club reading Lacuna, do let me know somehow, comments, Instagram, whatever. Another long epic is The Old Drift by Namwalli Serpell, this time set in Zambia. This is a story of 3 men who at the very beginning in 1904 one is trying to find the source of the Zambezi, trying to navigate through the Zambezi River. So he is a British man, there is also an Italian man and a Zambian man, and they interact together in ways that will change their lives. And then we travel through time and space to their children, and it is split into 3 sections. So we have the grandmothers, the mothers, and the children. That follows more than 100 years of Zambian history and on into the future. It is also narrated by a swarm of mosquitoes, and it is just so engaging, so interesting, the ways that it moves through history. I know a lot of people love books like this, like Pachinko and Homegoing. This one is definitely my favourite of this style that I have read. It is so funny and witty and sharp and biting. I think if you're a fan of Zadie Smith, you will really like Namwalli Serpell. I really enjoyed the elements of magical realism and absurdism that are used throughout this. We have, for example, an Italian woman who grows hair all over her body like Cousin It, and there is also the absurdist leader of the attempt at communism in Zambia in the 1960s. Bizarre and funny and really, really wonderful. The way it looks at neo-colonialism and medical colonialism, the AIDS crisis, and on into the future and kind of techno-dystopia in a very sort of limited way. The way that it uses conversation and characters having opposing viewpoints to bring in lots of different ideas. I just think so engaging and really, really wonderful to read. None of these characters are perfect, but they all feel really alive and human, which is something that I love in fiction. Next we have an actual classic, The Sailor Who Fell from Grace with the Sea by Yukio Mishima, which is translated from Japanese by John Nathan. This is from the mid-century, and it is a really strange, again, weird, short little book. It is about a boy whose mum gets involved with a sailor, and he is also part of this group of boys who are sort of running semi-feral around the town where they live, obsessed with this idea that adults are only pretending with life. They're only pretending to enjoy life. Actually, it is terrible and meaningless and pointless, and there is no reason for anything. And so they become obsessed with this sailor, thinking that he can show them the truth and like reveal the truth of the world to everyone else. But things don't go entirely as planned. It is described as being similar to Lord of the Flies, and I don't think it really has that, except for this band of boys intent on violence. But the premise of it and the ideas that it follows are quite a lot different, although there is a breakdown of society and a look almost at post-war Japanese society and the ideas about violence and disillusionment of that time. But this book is a lot more slow moving, a lot more strange, and more focused on sort of hidden moments and moments on the edge of society, rather than Lord of the Flies being on a desert island. It is not for the squeamish. If you don't like various different points of violence and animal cruelty, then I would avoid this one. But I think it is just so sort of unputdownable and really, really interesting the way that it looks at psyche, and I really enjoy the kind of disconnected, disjointed writing style of it. The way that it uses small physical moments to explore these ideas in a very slantwise direction. Another slim, strange book is Summerlight and Then It Comes the Night by Jon Kallman Steffanson, which is translated from the Icelandic. This is set in a small town in Iceland, and it is almost a series of interconnected short stories based on different people who live in this town, starting in a kind of light-hearted, comedic way and becoming more dark towards the centre, and then back out again, mirroring the Arctic day and Arctic night and the journey between those times in Iceland. It is a funny, again, slightly odd book, a slightly off-kilter look at the world that follows these people in this small town and looks at the relationships between people, the idea of being constantly known and constantly watched, and the idea of small town judgment, and also the idea of kind of eccentricities and the ways that people find wonder in the world. There are elements that are almost magical or almost fantastical. There is a man who puts holes in his ceiling to line up with constellations, and a moment where there may be something paranormal going on, but mostly it is really looking at these odd little people who live in this odd little town, in this odd little country, kind of isolated and on their own. And I really found it so funny and enjoyable to read. It has such a charm in that strangeness and such a sense of warmth, despite the detachment and the disconnect between many of the characters in it. Now moving on to Kazakhstan, because of course, we have The Dead Wander in the Desert by Rollan Seisenbayev, which is another classic, and is another epic book as well. This one is about a town on the edge of a inland sea in Kazakhstan, a giant saltwater lake that is becoming more and more salty because the Soviets have blocked up the river that feeds this lake in Uzbekistan in order to irrigate farms. And so the water is becoming more and more salinated, which is destroying the livelihood of the people who live around the lake. On top of this, the Soviets are also using the vast empty plains of Kazakhstan to test nuclear weapons, and so there is a lot of sickness related to that as well. And our main character travels off to Moscow in order to try and protect his town and the people in it. This book opens with a group of children coming to camp at the lake and being told stories of what happened years ago, and the story that is told is the story of this man trying to save his town. And so it has a lot of that oral storytelling tradition within it, lots of repetition and lots of lists and moments and rhythm to it, despite it being so long, which I really, really enjoyed. It is really compelling and interesting to read. I've not read anything else from Kazakhstan, but I would definitely recommend this one if you are as well are new to the literature from the country. If you also have read a lot of Russian classics, a lot of Russian epics, I think that there are elements of this book that remind me of those as well. Those sort of long descriptive passages of nature, or of a kind of industrious moment between characters, or discussions on a train journey, those elements of Russian classics. I think you would enjoy that in this one too. It definitely has those. It is much more a kind of philosophical, ideas based book than it is particularly character or plot driven. It is epic in length because there are so many diversions and so many ways it goes off the track, but I think it was really compelling to read, a really great audiobook as well if you are looking for a very long one. The next one is another strange little book but based on a true story, and that is A General Theory of Oblivion by Jose Eduardo Agualusa. It is based around the story of a woman who had survived a gang rape in Portugal and travelled to Angola when it was under Portuguese control. Her sister and her sister's husband have been involved in the diamond trade, and Angola rises up for independence and they flee with their diamonds back to Portugal, leaving the sister behind, who bricks herself into the apartment so no one can come in. She does have a balcony to grow food and get water, but she stays in there for 30 years, I believe, by herself. And outside of the flat, people come looking for those diamonds. So it is a kind of crime, thriller, heist kind of vibe with these people who are very incompetent criminals looking for diamonds, and also a strange, still, isolated person narrative of this woman trapped all by herself, and also a story of a fight for independence and what happened, who took over after the Portuguese left in Angola, and a post-colonial novel. It has a lot in it for a very short book, and again it is very funny, very charming, very strange and very compelling. I really enjoyed the characters in this one. They are a little bizarre, a little out of left field, so enjoyable. I think if you read a few of these books, you will definitely understand my sense of humour in literature, because I think a lot of these have that same thing in common, being dark and absurd and political, and I really think it is a great example of that. If you're looking to read more African fiction, it is a great piece of that as well. And I love the way that it came together at the end, these stories of these different characters throughout Luanda, how they slowly draw into one another and come up against one another, and I just think it was so much fun. And then the final book on my list is another big epic, big cast of characters, period of history, historical fiction, is Cathedral by Ben Hopkins. If you have read Pillars of Sand by Ken Follett, this is the better version, as far as I am concerned. It is set in Germany, in the medieval period, about a town that has begun to build the cathedral. And we begin with a guy who has been a shepherd, but has come to the town to pay his taxes and decided he wants to get involved in being a stonemason instead, become apprenticed to stonemasonry. But he will have to buy his way out of being a shepherd, and so he has to go to the Jewish quarter to borrow money in order to do that. And his brother gets involved working for the Jews in their money lending capacity, their money lending business. And it is based around the build-up of this cathedral, following characters from the town who are involved, the Jewish characters, the cardinal, various soldiers and things who are involved in the kind of very early foundations of Germany, because that's where this is set in, before Germany, obviously hundreds of years before Germany was a country, but about the sort of movement of boundaries and changing in the style of rule in Central Europe during the medieval period. And it is so brilliantly written. Each of the different voices is so clearly realised, written in slightly different styles. The kind of very evil cardinal is such a wonderful character to read from, his travelling to Rome and his experiences. And I think it is such a great look at this period of history, and it goes into things like pogroms and war. It's just really a wonderful tapestry of this time period. If you like big epic books that have big casts of characters, loads of these books will appeal to you, but this is one that I definitely think is worth reading. If you're a fan of Hilary Mantel, I think the writing, the kind of intricacy and the atmosphere of the writing, the way that a room is brought to life and the physicality of the writing, I think that those things about this really remind me of Hilary Mantel, who is of course the queen of historical fiction, so I can't think of much higher praise. Those are 10 books you probably haven't seen on Booktube before, except maybe in some of my videos. Let me know your favourite underrated books in the comments down below, and I will see you again very soon. Thank you very much for watching. Bye bye.